This episode is sponsored by Scare Scotland. Hello and welcome back to Film Pro Productivity and Success, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creative people to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 93, Creativity on Demand. Making something from nothing or quickly solving a creative problem that comes up to bite you or your project in the proverbial ass is sometimes a really hard thing to do, like catching lightning in a bottle. Creativity on demand is simply not always easy. I want to dip into this subject as it's a skill which I'm called upon to exercise on really every production, but it's never actually something I hear discussed very often. And apart from perhaps when folk talk about procrastination, maybe. Will Wheaton, who played Wesley in Star Trek The Next Generation, once said when talking of creativity that the goal isn't to make something everyone will love. The goal is to get excited, to make a thing where something wasn't there before. Life doesn't have a blueprint, you see. So having the ability and the discipline to sit down and pull something coherent right out of what seems to be thin air must be a relentless wheel of effort for some people. Writers, for example, would be a good example of that one. But creating this episode out of thin air, in fact, has been my latest problem. But I can give you a better example of something that came up recently on set. We were filming this sequence. It was a number of sequences in this difficult space. And the way it worked out, we had to reuse the same area twice, in effect, to make it work. And what I just to set this up, and I'm not naming names on this one, but I did warn that this was going to happen, and I was ignored, or I was forgotten about. It's perhaps more specific. I had urged this to be shot from one side of the line, if you know what I'm talking about in film in terms, for one part of the fight, and from the other side of the line on the other part of the fight, without trying to tread artistically on people's toes. This was what I thought would be the best way to shoot it and get the most out of the space. But within the first fight sequence, they crossed the line. And when we went to do the second fight sequence in the same space, it looked like the same space. And we were basically told we couldn't do what we'd rehearsed. So right stuck there in this situation, which was in the middle of nowhere, we had to very quickly come up with something. Now, I was racking my brain on how I could best do it. There was some options available to me. And the actress that was there, to give her due, she was great. She just started going, well, let's do this, and let's do that, and let's do this. And whereas I was listening to her, I was, in my mind anyway, very much disagreeing with much of what she said. But she was great for just moving forward. I was trying to think of things that not only would work, but would be safe. And her options weren't particularly safe, especially for the other actor in the scene. So anyway, we played around with it. We took a little bit of time. We took a bit more time than they wanted to give up, and we came up with a solution that worked. But it was difficult. It was hard, and we really struggled to come up with something that would work for the production. But the girl that was pushing forward, she was fantastic at solving the creativity on demand thing, whereas I had to carry the responsibility of safety, which is a limiting factor. She was free enough in her mind and her practices to just go try this, as was the director as well and the other actor in the scene. And so what I did in the end was I took much of what she'd said and part of what we had done before, and I had to carefully, without upsetting anyone, because we're in a creative environment, I'm trying not to step on toes of the director or the actor that was making these suggestions, try and put it together into something slightly different that was a little bit safer, but that still worked for the production. And that's a fairly recent thing that happened, where creativity and demand came into play. I'm sure if I put more thought to it, I could come up with 100 different examples, but that's possibly the most recent thing that's happened. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I'm doing this episode because I watched the Beatles documentary Get Back, and that's just sitting, it's a long documentary. It's like 8 hours or something like that, and you're just watching the Beatles be creative. Some of them are coming in with a half-done song, and then they're all as a group putting it together, or they're working individually on something they can present later on, and it was a really fascinating window into creativity at the highest level, and so if you've not seen that one, check it out. Creativity is often blocked by trying to be perfect. Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep. Tony Robbins, unquote. Creative people have open, active minds. They're usually buzzing with ideas and soaking up inspiration from the world round about them. They're always looking for new ways to solve problems as well, which sparks innovation and increased efficiency, and that's a valued skill in any field. But in the world of creativity itself, our world, that is, the world of the filmmaker, the artist, the designer, the screenwriter, or whatever, it is everything. We thrive and earn a living by our ability to hack or master creativity, but accessing it can be unreliable. In 2019, for Harvard Business Review, and in an article for Harvard Business Review, a guy called Joseph Grenny said, creativity is learning providence. It feels like an inexplicable miracle when it arrives, and we may never be able to isolate all of the variables that generate it. But in my experience, we can reliably create the conditions to invite it. And Steve Jobs said something similar. He said that you can actually teach yourself to become creative. He said, creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little bit guilty because sometimes they think they didn't really do it. They just saw something and it seemed obvious to them after a while. Creativity gives you license to suggest any possible solution you can think of, however fantastical that might be. And the true strength of your creative ideas lies in your ability to think kind of infinitely beyond any existing barriers that are out there. Erich Fromm said, creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. And I think that's a nice capture of what it is as well. Here's 7 things that can get in the way of creativity, though. As I was putting this episode together, I was like looking for solutions, and I kind of eventually went, hold on, what actually is stopping us from being creative? So here's 7 things that I've considered. And there's in the show notes, you'll be able to see where I've got references and stuff. I did do a fair bit of research for this one, but here's 7 things that get in the way of our creativity. First one is the mental block. That's where you get trapped in your own thinking. You're so locked into a familiar way of looking at the world or in a particular practice that you fail to see other options. You might make assumptions and approach a problem from a limiting premise, as it were. Or maybe your inner critic in there. You remember the inner critic? That's season 1. I was talking about that. Rears its ugly head and stops you from thinking straight. That's a mental block. Another thing would be an emotional barrier. Faced with the unknown, you might be scared of what you'll discover or reveal about yourself. Maybe your subject matter is painful, embarrassing, or just odd. All of these fears and qualms are just forms of resistance, though, leading to procrastination. And in effect, I suppose this is what this episode is all about, is procrastination. Another thing is work habits that don't work. You work too early or too late or too long or not long enough. You try too hard or you don't try hard enough. You don't have enough downtime or enough stimulation, or maybe you haven't set up systems to deal with the mundane tasks like email, admin, accounting and all that. So you keep interfering, let them keep interfering with your real work. I'm suffering from that now, by the way. I'm forcing myself to work in the podcast, but I've got a whole list of stuff written on this whiteboard behind me. But anyway, this is something that you can easily access and change, but it does take a bit of effort. As I say, I've kind of sidelined what I'm doing this series of podcasts I'm recording at the moment, and I'm writing up more and more admin tasks behind me, and I'm just not tackling them. Anyway, personal problems is another thing that can very easily get in the way, and this is the one thing that I see interrupting people who are doing 12-week years, including myself, by the way. These things can really throw you off what plans you've set out for yourself, and they're particularly bad for interrupting your creative flow. But life always gets in the way, and creativity just demands focus, and it's hard to concentrate if you're getting divorced or you're dealing with toddlers or battling an addiction, falling out with your best friend or grieving a loss or moving house or whatever. If you're lucky though, you'll only have to deal with maybe one thing at a time, but Troubles at this, in my experience, often come in twos or threes, and there's basically two ways to approach a personal problem that's interfering with your creative work. Either solve the problem or find ways of coping with it until it passes. And for the first option, you might need some specialist help or the support of some friends or family, and it might be worth taking a short-term break from work in order to resolve the issue and free yourself up for the future. Again, coming back to the 12-week year strategies, what I advise people to do if you're in the middle of a 12-week year and you get a job that takes a week, just postpone that part of your 12-week year by 1 week. I'm not saying that you should be deferring things all the time, but if you've suddenly got all this stuff to deal with, just say that week isn't counting, I'm going to move it 1 week forward, and just move your plans 1 week forward. Do not let it throw you completely out of it. But personal problems certainly interfere with your creativity. Next up is poverty. And, well, I know all about that. I'm skint at the moment. I've got 100 quid in the bag. It's that bad. But I'm due a payment this week, so we'll see how it goes. I'm not just talking about money, though, although a lack of cash is the kind of perennial problem for creatives. I think we all understand that one. But you might also be time poor or knowledge poor, have a threadbare network. Your networking connections might not be good. My connections aren't great at the moment because I've been kind of not out doing a lot of fight stuff for 2 years, and I'm finding it harder and harder to get new gigs. That said, don't panic, folks. In theory, I'm getting a new high-end television show to do fights on next month and another one the month after that, so hopefully that'll put me back on top. We shall see. Don't count your chickens till they're hatched. But like the last type of block, this one has two possible solutions. Either save up the time or the money or the resources that you need, or make a virtue of necessity and set yourself the creative challenge of achieving as much as possible within the constraints that you have. Saving up time and money and other resources, by the way, is the sort of thing I do if I do make a short film, because as I've talked about in that last episode, I don't get funding. If I'm doing something, I need to pay for it myself. And if you're having to drop $2,500, $5,000, whatever on a low budget film that you're paying for yourself, you really need to make time and actually earn the money to make it happen. Anyway, I'm going off on one there. Next up here, I have overwhelm. And I know all about that too. I've done an episode on it. But sometimes a creativity block will come from just having too much and not too little. You've taken on too many commitments, or you've got too many good ideas, or you're overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming demands on your time, and incoming information is another problem. This is a digital information age, and sometimes there's just too much of it. And you can feel paralyzed by options and obligations, or simply knackered from working too hard for too long. That's when you must recognize that it's time to cut down. If you take on too many commitments, look back to episode 2 of this show and start saying no. No needs to become your default option if you're going to slow that income of new stuff coming into your life. And if you've got too many ideas, execute a few and put the rest into a folder marked back burner. If you suffer from information overload, start blocking off downtime or focused work time into your schedule. Anyway, next up on my list here of things that get in the way, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things, this is just my list, is perfectionism. And again, I've talked about this kind of endlessly, and it's covered in not just one episode, but several episodes. But don't let your need for things to be perfect stop you from getting on with what you know you need to do. Winston Churchill talked about it, actually. He said, perfectionism spells paralysis. Analysis paralysis is another episode I've done before, but perfectionism spells paralysis, and it can definitely get in the way of your creative flow. Communications breakdowns and limitations of maybe a pecking order that you might be in. I like a pecking order, by the way. I like to know who the director is. They're in charge, producer in charge of a different element, DOP in charge of something else, and then there's other people down, the rank below them. And I like to know where I stand in that. I like to know when I'm allowed to speak up and when I'm not. And I'm very careful about not stepping on toes, especially directors' toes, because fight director, some people don't like the fact I'm called a fight director. They prefer me to call myself fight ranger or something like this. I think they actually feel slightly threatened. But my main effort when I go into a production is to not step on toes, and that can be very limiting to my creativity. But anyway, that's just an element of what I'm talking about here. Creative blocks can happen between people actually interacting as well as in your own head. And if you work in a team or a partnership, then tensions like that are inevitable. and they can make it hard for you to do your best work, especially if you've got like a particularly difficult person, or even if they're just perceived to be difficult in your working life. And sometimes you can get blocked by your own imagination and fear of presenting ideas or fear of criticism. And sometimes this happens for real, and you do actually have to deal with it, of course. But communication, basically, between departments, between people, can be another reason why creativity kind of flounders. I want to give another example, just while I'm here, about creativity. When I was working at the sets, there was a load of brilliant people at the sets. There really were. I'm not involved there now. I haven't done anything with them in 10 years. So which is why I'm less bothered about mentioning things to do with it. But back in the day, we did some amazing productions, amazing stuff. And one of the best directors that I worked with was Kenny Miller. I worked with some brilliant directors, by the way. Brilliant. Even now, love them. But anyway, Kenny was one of them. And Kenny was the designer there for a lot of the shows as well. He was the proper assistant director, where the assistant director I talked about last week was me coming in and assisting the director. He was the actual assistant director of the sets. It's a different thing. Same title, different thing. But Kenny had surrounded himself with, no, he'd surrounded himself, people had surrounded him who totally believed in him. And he was in a situation where if they were doing a production of Hamlet, I swear to God, if Kenny had come out and said, I've got a design for this production of Hamlet, and he said, you're all going to be dressed, all the actors are going to be dressed as babies, and they're going to be wearing nappies, and they're all going to be smoking cigars throughout this production. People wouldn't have went, this is ridiculous, because he's done so many stuff and they believed in him. So, but this never happened, by the way, I'm just making this up. If he'd come out and said, right, Hamlet, babies, nappies, cigars, that's the way it's going to go, the people that are around him believed in him so much that they would say, right, let's do it, with no question, and they would fully back him up. And as I get older, this is what I see getting away from me a little bit. When I was younger and I was in, it's not that I was in positions of more power than I'm in now when I'm going to productions, but people knew I was doing it. I don't advertise what I'm doing anymore at all. I don't talk about it generally, partly because I do so much TV and film, I'm not allowed to talk about it. You know, I've got restrictions on what I'm actually allowed to talk about. But I don't have as many people interested in what I'm doing now as I did then, because I'm interacting with less people these days, and I really don't shout about it. I don't shout from the rooftops about what I do. Maybe in this podcast you might think I do, but I really don't. I don't talk about it generally on social media, etc. And I find it much harder now to get things off the ground than I did back then, because my I have shut down various means of communication, and I find it difficult. But like, creativity will always thrive when there's trust in a group of people. It's kind of, I'm trying to make this link to what I was talking about with communication, but I don't know if I'm succeeding. It's just another general point about creativity. If you're in a supportive environment with other people that surround you that are brilliant, a brilliant team, you can produce creativity on demand much easier than if you're on your own, or you're standing on a film set and nobody knows who you are. They're less likely to listen to you. It's a common problem I have on film sets. Is I'll go on and I'll be just saying this is how it should be done and stuff like that. And some people actually hire me because they think I'm just insurance or something, and they think they're going to get to do whatever they want. But I don't let them do that. I'm there to make a good fight, safe fight, and to follow the flow of the director's vision and the producer's vision, the writer's vision, and all that, and put that on screen. I don't know if this is making sense. Am I talking garbage? Anyway, let's move on. I'm not going to hang about with this episode. I must apologise, but I just have to drop in here the most famous creativity quote that I know, and it's from Albert Einstein, who said, "Creativity is intelligence having fun," and I love that one. But there are many fairly simple things that you can do to avoid these creative blocks I've been talking about and generate creativity on demand. So let's look at some more solutions to the problems that I've raised earlier. First thing I'd say is embrace all ideas, even the bad ones. How many of you have been in meetings where everyone's asked to contribute ideas, and even though you had one, you kept quiet about it? Fear of looking stupid silences even the best of us, but the single most effective way to enhance creativity is eradicating that concept of a poor idea. Having a bad idea or an idea that doesn't work is often the thing that generates another more effective scheme. That's exactly what the actress was doing when she was firing away, coming up with new things. We could do this, we could do this, we could do this. She was generating potentially garbage ideas, but she was generating ideas which was more than was coming out from other people. So that was interesting. Anyway, second thing to do, so that was embrace all ideas, even the bad ones. Second thing is seek new experiences and try and remember them. New experiences, or experiences that make you think in new ways, can have an enormous impact on our creativity. And the more trips that you take, the more books that you read, the more conversations that you have, all these things imprint important experience and new thoughts into your subconscious. You're essentially building your own mental library that you can borrow from, you can take ideas from whenever you need inspiration. And creativity flows more easily when we have thought-provoking resources to peruse. A warning there about YouTube, though. If you're perusing YouTube, that can be such a time sucker that it's not always good to dip into YouTube. I love YouTube, but it's something I need to control, because I can start researching an episode, for example, or an editing thing, and I could find myself in the next moment watching cat videos or Judge Judy or something. I've really, really got to be careful. But seek new experiences, not necessarily YouTube, and remember things, and they'll always help you to have a library to dip into if you're in trouble somewhere down the line. Another thing to do is to get out of your comfort zone. And stepping out of your comfort zone kills two birds with one stone when it comes to creativity. First thing is exposing yourself to the unknown stimulates your mind and gives you new ideas to store away in your mental box of inspiration, as it were. And secondly, embracing the uncomfortable. Remember, I've talked about it before, but getting comfortable, being uncomfortable can generate unexpected dialogue and help you to reach new perspectives. And the more contributions that you have, the more connections you can make, just like that Steve Jobs quote I gave you earlier. So get out of your comfort zone. Another thing to do is to give yourself space. While creativity might be something that you can control, to a degree at least, it's still important to give yourself space when beginning the creative process. Find somewhere that you can think without distractions, and leave your phone, go for a walk, put yourself in a comfortable environment and let your thoughts flow freely. You do not want distractions round about you when you're trying to come up with solutions. Don't make them too comfortable, though. You'll find yourself asleep. It's a creative environment you want to be in. Give yourself space for that. So trust the process is number 5. Great work rarely arrives in the mind complete and ready to deliver. Whether you know it or not, you've got a creative process, and if you have a job in the creative world, it would serve you well to write out that process. So think back on past projects. What did you do first? What came after that? What time of the day were you best at, perhaps, as well? And no matter how intimidating a project seems, you should be always able to start at the beginning and trust your process. The things that you always do will result in an awesome creative result by the end of it. Number 6 on this list is, so that was, what was it? Here's my notes. What was I talking about? Yeah, trust your process. Number 6 is to refuse to be negative. Negativity is the enemy of creativity. Don't allow your brain to assault you with fearful thoughts about deadlines or consequences of failing. And likewise, don't let yourself whine about your lack of time, your equipment, or your support. The whole "I'm an artist and no one understands me" bit will not be of any assistance to you. Just because you don't feel creative in the moment doesn't mean you aren't incredibly creative anyway. And be careful of interacting with negative people, or if you find yourself on the phone to somebody just shooting the breeze when you're trying to take a break or whatever, don't let whatever's bringing them down bring you down as well. And keep your eye on your watch, because sometimes you can get in a conversation with somebody who's on a negative who will take 45 or a minutes or an hour out of your life, and you need to avoid that. You can say that to them. I speak quite often to my friend Jim, and he and I will have something to moan about, and we both stop each other from going too negative on things. And I would say that's the same with a few other friends as well that I discuss things with. But anyway, number 7, my final one that I've got written down here is to start, even if it's bad, even if it's garbage. Start. Blank pages are the intimidating thing if you're writing something out, and nothing ahead of you will always be intimidating if you know you've got a deadline 3 weeks down the line to produce a theatre show or whatever, which is devised. And I've done a few very successful, very enjoyable devised shows in my time, 5 stars no less. But sometimes you've got to suck it up and do the work, even though you've got nothing ahead of you with anything planned, and you've got to produce something. And even if it's bad, whatever you're putting together, even if you don't want to do it, remember these immortal words of Ernest Hemingway. He said, the first draft of everything is shit, right? I use that quote a lot. So don't dwell on how bad it feels. Don't dwell on the first draft being garbage. Having something to work from that you can rework and improve will always be better than having nothing at all. So always start. Get it done. Okay. I don't know if this has been of help. I don't know if I've gone off on too many trips, but there you go. That's what I've had for today. Summing up though, I covered, I'm just looking at my notes, 7 things that get in the way of creativity. The mental block, where you get trapped in your own thinking. Emotional barriers, where you're kind of maybe scared of what you're going to be dealing with. Third one there is work habits that don't work. Just the time of day that you're working at, or too early, too late, too long, not long enough. Personal problems, they'll always get in the way. Find ways round about them. And next up, poverty, which is not just financial poverty, but you could be time poor or knowledge poor, or have a poor network, or be short of equipment. Poverty is a problem, and that can definitely get in the way of creativity. But then having too much money potentially could be a problem as well. If you look at the Star Wars movies, the last few Star Wars movies, and attack me if you like, but really they weren't very good, and they got gradually worse and worse and worse. They had nothing but money. So creativity quite often will come from not having something rather than from actually having enough or more than enough. Poverty, although it is a problem, can also be a solution. Anyway, overwhelm is another one. I've talked about it a lot. Sometimes things get in the way. You just get too much information. That's definitely a problem. Perfectionism, need I say more? And communications breakdowns. That's when you're dealing with other people. These are all things that can break down your creativity and stop it from being there when you need it. And some solutions that I offered up were to embrace all ideas. That was the first one I came up with. Second one was to seek new experiences and remember them, so you've kind of got a library of things you can tap into when you're in trouble. We all do that anyway, but I'm just bringing it up as a conscious thing. Number 3 would get out of your comfort zone, try new things, new experiences, find stimulation. Number 4, give yourself space, creative space. It might just be a walk in the park or whatever. It might be a swim. It might be that you just shut yourself off from a few things, switch your mobile phone off, whatever you need to do, but give yourself space, and that'll help as well. Trust your process. Yeah, that's identifying that you've got a process. You've probably got one you've not even thought about. Number 6, refuse to be negative, because negativity is, of course, the enemy of creativity, and start even if what you're doing is garbage. Remember, Ernest Hemingway, the first draft of everything is shit, but if you've got that first draft, you can make it better and better and better. Okay, so I've not written down a call to action for you. Let me think. Here's a bit of action you can do. How about going on and leaving a review for the show on the Facebook page? There's a lot of people listening to this, but I don't have a lot of people interacting with me on social media. So there's a bit of call to action. Why don't you jump on the Facebook page and leave me a review? Some of you have done it already. Thank you very much. But there's other people out there that can do it. Spread the word about the show. There's another thing you can do. But anyway, that's enough for just now. Next time, in fact, let me just talk about the last time. Last week's show was called 10 Things I Learned the Hard Way, so please go back and check that out. Next week is going to be different. I'm going to be doing 2 of the mini shows, which are the format trial for what I'm going to be hopefully doing the next 50 shows. That's show 101 to 150 will be in this shorter format. So there'll be 2 shows out next week, one on Sunday, one on Wednesday. Would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on them. And check them out. But today's final quote is from Sheryl Sandberg, and I want you to remember this one when you're next stuck with a creative problem. And she said that done is better than perfect. So bear that in mind and take control of your own destiny. Keep on shooting, and join me, please do join me next week for those new episodes of Film Pro Productivity and Success. The music that you can hear right now is Adventures by A. Himitsu, and you can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. Only there will you get the full notes, by the way. Follow my personal account on Twitter if you like, at fight_director, or follow the show on Twitter at FilmProProdPod, or on Facebook at FilmProProductivity. And please support the show. Continue to support it by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review. Thank you.